Welcome to our channel Folk Street Mystery, where every story begins in shadow and every clue goes under a single street lamp. Step inside. The next case is already waiting. Don't forget to share thoughts. Your feedback keeps the mystery alive. Now let's begin.
Nero Wolfe, The Devil's Auction, The Highest Bid Was Murder. Chapter 1, The Invitation with No Return Address. If you think the United States Postal Service is a dull outfit, you've never seen what it can do with a stamp, a lie, and a man's name written in ink that looks like it was bled out of a fountain pen. It was a Tuesday, because in our line of work, trouble always has the manners to arrive on a Tuesday, when Fritz brought it in on a silver tray as if it were a souffle instead of a threat. He waited until I looked up from the desk, because Fritz has a talent for dignity that doesn't require announcements. "A letter for Mr. Wolfe," he said, voice mild, eyes careful. I took it. The envelope was black. Not dark blue or business gray. Black. Like a preacher's mood. It had no return address, no postmark worth reading, and no friendly flourish. Just 3 words, centered and printed with an arrogance that didn't bother with handwriting. Nero Wolfe. Brownstone. West 35th. No zip code. Whoever sent it was either extremely confident or extremely stupid. In New York those two conditions often overlap. I sniffed it, because I'm Archie Goodwin, and when you're Archie Goodwin you develop instincts the way other people develop ulcers. The paper smelled faintly of wax and something else, dry, sharp, almost metallic. Fritz watched me like a man observing a dog about to bite the mailman. "Give him my condolences," I said. Fritz didn't smile, but the corners of his eyes tightened. "If it is bad news, Mr. Archie, then I hope it is not during the orchid hours." "It's always during orchid hours," I told him, and slid it open with my letter opener. Inside was a single card, thick and expensive. No cheap stock here. The lettering was embossed, dark red on black. Somebody paid for style. Somebody also paid to make sure the message couldn't be mistaken as a joke. The Devil's Auction. Midnight. Thursday. The Armitage House, East 79th. Under that, one more line in smaller print. A secret worth more than a life. No RSVP, no instructions, no signature. Just a deliberate hush, like a hand over your mouth. I sat back and stared at it. The brownstone was quiet in that particular way it gets when Nero Wolfe is upstairs with his orchids and Fritz is pretending the kitchen is a cathedral. Outside, New York hummed, taxis and horns and the far-off impatience of the world, but in our office it felt like somebody had turned down the lights. I carried the card to the red leather chair, because that's where Wolfe belongs, and if you want his attention you bring the problem to his throne. He was at his desk, not in the chair yet, because the gods decree that he must finish his reading before he starts his thinking. Wolfe was massive, serene, and so still you'd swear he was a statue of a great man in a museum, except statues don't breathe with contempt. He glanced at the black card in my hand as if it were a dead fly. "What is that, Archie?" "An invitation," I said. "To something that sounds like it serves cocktails in hell." Wolfe extended a hand, took the card between 2 fingers, and read it without changing expression. That, by the way, is one of his hobbies, refusing to show the world what it just paid to see. After a moment he placed it on the desk as if it had offended him. "Nonsense," he pronounced. "Agreed," I said. "But it's expensive nonsense." He looked at me with that calm, heavy gaze that can make a confident man wonder if he's been wearing his shoes on the wrong feet. "Archie," he said, "you are not to attend." I leaned on the desk. "You haven't even decided you're not attending." "I have decided," he said, "that I am not to be summoned by anonymous melodrama." That's a beautiful sentence. Frame it. Hang it in the hall. The trouble is, this anonymous melodrama used your name. "My name is used daily," Wolfe replied, "by fools, clerks, criminals, and occasionally journalists." "Sure," I said. "But this fool wrote it on black paper in red ink, which makes it feel personal." He reached for the bell and rang once, short, peremptory. Fritz appeared instantly, like a well-trained miracle. Beer, Wolfe said. Fritz nodded, and vanished. Wolfe turned back to me. We shall ignore it. Of course, I said. That's always the best way to handle mysterious invitations that promise secrets worth more than a life. Exactly. We might have continued the argument until the beer arrived and Wolfe's mood improved, but the doorbell chimed downstairs. Fritz's footsteps were already moving to answer it. He has the hearing of a German shepherd and the patience of a priest. A minute later Fritz returned, guiding a man into the office. The visitor was in his 40s, impeccably dressed in a way that suggested money with taste, but his face had forgotten how to enjoy it. He had the pallor of someone who had spent the last 2 nights trying to outrun his own thoughts. His eyes flicked around the room, desk, chair, orchids in the distant hallway glow, as if he expected an assassin to pop out from behind the dictionary. He stopped short when he saw Wolfe, and tried to assemble a smile. It came out crooked. "Mr. Wolfe," he said, voice thin. "My name is Lucien Hale." Wolfe stayed seated, shoulders broad, expression politely uninterested. "You are expected?" "No," Hale admitted. "But I needed to see you. Today." I gestured to the chair across from Wolfe's desk, because I like to pretend I run the front of the house. "Sit down, Mr. Hale. Take a breath. Try not to die on the rug. Fritz gets sensitive." Hale sat. His hands were steady only because he clenched them. Wolfe said, "You have 10 seconds to state your business." Hale swallowed. "I received an invitation." I didn't even have to glance at Wolfe to know his eyebrows didn't move. Hale dug into his inside pocket and produced a black envelope identical to ours. He set it on Wolfe's desk with 2 fingers, like it was hot. I said, "Let me guess. Midnight. Thursday. Armitage House. And the devil's throwing a party." Hale's eyes snapped to mine. "Yes." Wolfe's voice was mild. "You came to show me a card?" "No," Hale said. "I came because I think someone is going to be killed. There are statements that, in our office, don't create panic. They create interest." Wolfe tilted his head a fraction. "Why?" Hale's gaze darted toward the stairs, then the window, then back. "Because last year there was another auction. Not this theater. But something private. Very private. Someone vanished afterward." I leaned forward. "Vanished how? Like, took a train to Florida? Or vanished like smoke?" Hale's jaw tightened. "Vanished like a man who had seen something he shouldn't." Wolfe's eyes sharpened. "Name?" Hale hesitated. "I can't." "Then you are wasting my time," Wolfe said, and reached toward the bell again. "Wait," Hale blurted, sweat shining at his temples now. "I can tell you what I do. I broker, art, antiques, certain collections. I have clients. Discreet clients." "Discreet," I echoed. "That's a friendly word for dangerous." Hale didn't deny it. He said, "This invitation isn't for amusement. It's a selection. Someone is testing the people invited. Measuring who will pay what. And for what." Wolfe's voice was almost gentle, which is how you know he's interested. "And you were invited." "Why?" Hale stared at the edge of Wolfe's desk. "Because I know things." "Such as?" Hale's lips trembled once. He steadied them. "Not here. Not allowed." Wolfe's eyes went cold. "Then not at all." Fritz arrived with the beer. He set it beside Wolfe with the precision of a surgeon placing an instrument. Wolfe thanked him with a nod, his version of affection. Hale watched the beer like it was a betrayal. I said, "Mr. Hale, you barged into a man's home, hinted at murder, refused to name names, and now you're acting shy. Help me out, what do you want?" Hale looked at me then, as if clinging to the idea that I might be the human one in the room. "I want protection," he said. "And I want someone to stop it." Wolfe sipped his beer. He said, "You want me to attend this auction?" "I want you to know what it is," Hale insisted. "If I go alone," he stopped, swallowed hard. "They will know I'm afraid. And if I don't go," his eyes lifted to Wolfe. "They will know I'm hiding." "And what," Wolfe asked, "is the consequence of their knowledge?" Hale's voice dropped to a rasp. "A body. Maybe mine." The room went quiet enough to hear the city outside, and in that quiet I noticed something small. Hale's invitation card, unlike ours, had a faint smudge near the bottom edge, like someone had handled it with a thumb that carried fine dust. Pale dust. Almost chalky. Wolfe noticed it too. Of course he did. His gaze lingered a heartbeat on that smudge, then lifted back to Hale's face. "I will not attend," Wolfe said. Hale's face crumpled. "Then I'm dead." Wolfe's voice stayed level. "Perhaps. But melodrama is not evidence." I cleared my throat. "Boss." Wolfe looked at me. I said, "You don't have to attend. You can still investigate. That's what we do." I go. "You think?" "We charge. Everybody's happy. Or at least alive." Wolfe stared at me as if weighing whether my suggestion was idiotic or merely inconvenient. Then he said, "Archie will attend." Hale exhaled a shaky breath, relief flooding his face so fast it looked like weakness. Wolfe added, "You will provide me with every name you can. Every detail. Every whisper. If you omit something, you will not need the devil's auction to kill you. I will dismiss you." Hale nodded quickly. "Yes. Yes, of course." Wolfe's eyes settled into that calm, immovable certainty that makes you feel like the universe has rules again. "Very well," he said. "Archie, you will go as my eyes. You will observe everything, hear everything, and touch nothing unnecessarily." I grinned. "That's practically a vow of chastity." Wolfe ignored me. He said to Hale, "And you will remain where I can reach you until Thursday." Hale blinked. "Here. In your house." "In my orbit," Wolfe corrected. "If you cannot afford my fee, you cannot afford your life." Hale swallowed. "I can afford it." Wolfe nodded once, like a judge accepting a plea. I picked up our black card and tapped it against Hale's. 2 invitations. 2 men. 1 secret worth more than a life. That line bothered me. Secrets don't come with price tags unless someone is selling fear. Outside, a taxi horn blared like a warning. I said, "All right." Midnight Thursday. The Armitage House. The Devil's Auction. I looked at Hale. "Try not to die before we get there. It ruins the suspense." Hale didn't laugh. Wolfe lifted his beer again, as if toasting something invisible. "Proceed," he said. And just like that, the game began, quietly, politely, and with the kind of civilized menace that New York does better than any city on earth. Chapter 2, Bidding on Sin. If you've never been invited to a midnight auction in a dead man's mansion, I recommend it only if you enjoy long shadows and short life expectancies. Thursday night arrived wrapped in a fog that seemed personally invested in wrongdoing. New York has many costumes, but fog is its favorite for crime. It softens the edges of buildings and sharpens the edges of men. Before I left the brownstone, Wolfe delivered instructions as if I were being launched into enemy territory, which, in a way, I was. He was in his red leather armchair, massive and immovable, orchids faintly perfuming the air from upstairs. The lamplight gilded his profile, turning him into a monument to stubborn intellect. "Observe," he said. "Do not speculate. Do not interfere unless life demands it." "That's comforting," I said, adjusting my tie. "Define demands." "You will know," Wolfe replied. "You possess at least that much intelligence." "High praise," I said. "Should I bring you back a souvenir? A pitchfork?" Wolfe ignored that. "Note the hands," he continued. "Men betray themselves with their hands. And the eyes. Particularly when money is involved. Anything else? Yes, he said calmly. Return alive. That was Wolfe's version of affection. I left him there with his beer and his certainty and stepped into the damp Manhattan night. A taxi took me uptown, its headlights cutting weak tunnels through fog. The driver didn't ask questions. In New York, you can tell a cabbie you're headed to a seance or a slaughterhouse and he'll only worry about the tip. The Armitage house stood on East 79th like a wealthy widow who had stopped caring. Once grand, now dim, its stone facade wore age like regret. Only a single lantern burned beside the entrance. 2 men in dark suits flanked the door. They weren't smiling. Invitation, one said. I handed over the black card. He examined it as if it might bite him, then nodded and stepped aside. Inside, the air smelled of old wood and new money. The foyer ceiling arched high, a chandelier glowing low enough to flatter sin. Velvet ropes directed guests toward a large drawing room at the back. There were perhaps a dozen people in attendance. That's the thing about secret gatherings, small audiences, high stakes. I spotted Lucien Hale near the fireplace, nursing a champagne flute like it was medicine. He looked worse than he had at the brownstone. Sweat gathered at his temples despite the cool room. I drifted through the crowd, cataloging. A heavy-set man with a silver tie pin shaped like an eagle, politician. Confirmed when I caught someone addressing him as Senator Caldwell. A tall, severe fellow with the posture of a man who signs contracts in blood, shipping magnate, I guessed. Later confirmed as Horace Vance. A pale woman in a tailored black gown, pearls subtle but expensive. Introduced to someone as Mrs. Adriana Devereux, philanthropist. Her smile was surgical. And near the window, studying the fog outside as if it were a painting, stood a lean European gentleman with silver hair and an expression of quiet contempt. Victor Kessler. Art collector. That made 5 of us, counting Hale and me. There were others, assistants, a lawyer or 2, but the weight in the room clustered around those 4. A thin man in a formal black suit stepped onto a small platform at the center of the room. His face was sharp, voice cultured. Ladies and gentlemen, he said. Welcome to the Devil's Auction. Nobody laughed. He gestured toward a pedestal draped in dark velvet. Atop it rested a small steel box, brushed metal, industrial, ugly. No ornament. Just a single lock. Our lot this evening, he continued, is not art, nor artifact. It is information. Sealed within this container are documents that, if revealed publicly, would alter reputations, and possibly history. There it was. The hook. A secret worth more than a life, he added. I watched the faces. The senator's jaw tightened. Vance's fingers drummed once against his thigh, then stilled. Mrs. Devereux did not blink. Kessler's expression remained politely bored. Lucien Hale swallowed. The auctioneer raised a small gavel. Bidding begins at $500,000. The number hung in the air like smoke. 500,000, said Vance almost immediately. The senator followed. 6. No hesitation. No protest about authenticity. Nobody asked what was in the box. That told me something. The bids climbed smoothly. 700. 8. A million. Hale leaned toward me. You see, he whispered. They're afraid. Of what? I murmured. Exposure. I studied him. And you? He looked at the steel box as if it contained his obituary. I was invited because I facilitated certain transactions. If what's in there becomes public, you're finished. He nodded faintly. The bidding passed 1,200,000. Mrs. Devereux lifted her paddle, discreet black card. 1.3. Her voice was calm. Too calm. Kessler finally spoke. 1.5. The room grew warmer, or maybe that was just the temperature of guilt rising. Then Hale did something unexpected. 1.6, he said, voice shaking but audible. Every head turned. That surprised me. He had come here frightened, not ambitious. Why bid? I leaned toward him. You trying to save yourself or bury something? His eyes were wild. I can't let them have it. Why? He didn't answer. The auctioneer smiled thinly. 1.6 million. Do I hear 1.7? The senator lifted his card. 1.7. Before the auctioneer could continue, Hale made a small, choking sound. At first I thought he'd decided to faint for dramatic effect. Then his champagne flute slipped from his fingers and shattered on the marble floor. He clutched his throat. The room froze. Hale's eyes bulged. He tried to speak. No words came, only a wet gasp. He collapsed. I was at his side in 2 strides. His pulse fluttered under my fingers like a trapped bird. His skin had gone pale gray. Call a doctor, someone shouted. The auctioneer barked orders. 2 attendants rushed forward. I smelled almonds. That's when my patience packed its bags. Don't move him, I snapped. And nobody leaves. Several people objected at once. The senator stiffened. You have no authority. Correct, I said. But I have a memory. Hale convulsed once more, then went still. Silence fell like a dropped curtain. Mrs. Devereux covered her mouth delicately. Kessler stepped back, calculating distance. Vance muttered something under his breath that sounded suspiciously like a curse. I rose slowly. The auctioneer regained composure first. This is unfortunate, he said, tone clipped. But not our concern. The gentleman may have suffered a heart condition. I looked at the steel box. Heart conditions don't smell like almonds, I said. The auctioneer's eyes flickered, just a fraction. Police were called. In Manhattan, sirens travel faster than rumors. While we waited, I drifted toward the pedestal. The steel box sat exactly where it had been. Untouched. Or so it seemed. I bent slightly. The lock showed no damage. But the velvet cloth beneath it had a faint indentation, as if the box had been moved recently and returned. Interesting. When I straightened, I noticed something else. Victor Kessler was no longer near the window. In fact, neither was the steel box. The pedestal stood empty. The velvet cloth lay undisturbed, but the box was gone. Where is it? I demanded. The auctioneer turned sharply. His face drained of color. That is impossible. Looks possible to me. Panic rippled through the room. The senator's voice rose. Search the premises. Vance barked at one of the attendants. Mrs. Devereux remained very still, eyes lowered. I scanned the crowd. Kessler reappeared near the door, hands visible, expression mildly irritated. I assure you, he said smoothly, I have not taken your trinket. Sirens wailed outside. Police would arrive in minutes. I crossed to the auctioneer. Who had access to that box? No one, he insisted. It was sealed. Before tonight? He hesitated. There it was. A crack. Before tonight? I repeated. He cleared his throat. It was delivered to us by an intermediary. Name. Confidential. Not anymore. The front doors burst open as officers entered, questions flying. I stepped back, letting uniformed authority take over. Hale lay motionless on the marble floor. Champagne and death mingled unpleasantly. As detectives began herding guests into smaller clusters, I slipped toward a side hallway. There, near a service entrance, I saw something that made the back of my neck tighten. 2 men were wheeling a covered gurney, not in, but out. Not toward the police. Toward the alley. And the sheet covering the body was not standard police issue. I followed. Hold it, I said sharply. They froze. One of them forced a smile. Just removing the deceased for privacy. Privacy is a lovely word, I said. So is arrest. Behind me, footsteps approached. An officer. The two men exchanged a look. In that second, just one, I understood something vital. Lucien Hale hadn't simply died. He had been expected to. The ambulance finally arrived. The gurney was redirected. But when I turned back toward the drawing room, the steel box was still missing. And every person in that mansion had both motive and opportunity. I checked my watch. Wolfe would be waiting in his chair, orchids perfuming the room, beer beside him, mind already arranging the facts like chess pieces. I had a dead man, a vanished steel box, 4 powerful suspects, and the distinct feeling that this wasn't an auction. It was a test. And someone had just bid with murder. Chapter 3, The Price of Silence. If you want to ruin Nero Wolfe's breakfast, tell him someone has committed murder in the presence of bad champagne. I reached the brownstone a little after 2 in the morning, smelling of fog, marble floors, and disappointment. The city was quieter then, taxis fewer, the neon softened. Murder looks different after midnight, it loses its theatrics and becomes administrative. Fritz let me in without comment. He had that look which says he already knows it's bad but hopes it isn't untidy. Wolfe was in his chair. Of course he was. The red leather armchair had embraced him, a lamp cast golden light over his broad face. A glass of beer rested on the side table. He had not gone to bed. That told me he was interested. Report, he said. I removed my coat and tossed it over the hall chair. 1 dead art broker, 1 vanished steel box, 4 very nervous millionaires, and a mansion that should charge admission for melodrama. Wolfe closed his eyes briefly. Chronologically, Archie. I prefer murder in order. So I gave it to him. The fog. The guests. Senator Caldwell with the patriotic tie pin and the sweating temples. Horace Vance, shipping titan, whose hands only stilled when the numbers climbed. Mrs. Adriana Devereux, philanthropist, pearl-wearing surgeon of reputations. Victor Kessler, collector of rare things and rarer silences. I described the steel box, brushed metal, industrial, ugly. The velvet beneath it indented as if recently shifted. The auctioneer, thin, cultured, evasive. And Hale? Wolfe asked. Bid, I said. That's the part that bothers me. He didn't come to win. He came to prevent someone else from winning. Wolfe's eyes opened. Explain. He bid 1.6 million. Voice shaking, but he meant it. Was he capable of paying? Yes, I said. But barely. He looked like a man mortgaging his soul. Wolfe nodded once. Continue. I told him about the collapse. The almonds. The chaos. The box disappearing while everyone stared at. They tried to wheel him out a side entrance before the police secured the place. Wolfe's brows lifted slightly. Efficient. Too efficient, I said. As if they were prepared. Silence settled between us, thick but productive. Wolfe lifted his beer, sipped, and then asked, the champagne. Passed on trays before the bidding began. Who served Hale? A uniformed attendant. Young. Nervous. I didn't catch his name. You will. Yes, sir. Wolfe leaned back, fingers steepled against his massive chest. The poison was administered before the bidding. That's my guess. Hale hadn't drunk much before he bid. And the bidding was genuine. Oh, it was genuine. Those people weren't pretending. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Then the auction was not about acquiring the contents. It was about something else. I smiled faintly. You're ahead of me. I am usually, he said calmly. Fritz entered quietly with coffee. Even at 2:30 in the morning, he moved as if the house were a monastery. When he withdrew, Wolfe said, autopsy. Preliminary word from Inspector Kramer, rare toxin. Fast acting. Delivered orally. Specific compound? Not yet. But the almond scent suggests cyanogenic origin. Wolfe grunted softly. Crude. Effective, I said. He ignored that. Who benefited from Hale's death? That's a crowded list, I replied. He brokered discreet art sales. Likely knew where certain skeletons were displayed. Wolfe's gaze sharpened. Names. Senator Caldwell, I began. Rumor says he facilitated war contracts during the last administration. Contracts that profited Vance's shipping lines. Connection noted, Wolfe said. Mrs. Devereux, I continued. Public saint. Private offshore accounts, according to Hale. And Kessler? Collector with debts. European connections. Might have been laundering artifacts. Wolfe's expression did not change, but his mind was assembling the pieces. I could almost hear them clicking. And the auctioneer, he asked. Unknown intermediary. Claimed the steel box was delivered by a confidential source. Wolfe tapped one finger on the armrest. The box. Gone. Without disruption. Without so much as a wrinkle in the velvet. Wolfe's eyes closed briefly again. It was removed by someone calm. Or practiced, I said. Yes. He opened his eyes. Archie, did you observe any exchange of glances before Hale collapsed? I replayed it. The senator looked annoyed. Vance impatient. Devereux unblinking. Kessler amused. Amused? Just slightly. Like a man watching theater he already understands. Wolfe grunted. The telephone rang. At that hour, it never brings poetry. I picked it up. Wolfe residence. Inspector Kramer's gravel voice answered. Goodwin. Your client's dead. Confirmed? I asked. Confirmed. Cyanide derivative. Delivered in champagne. Any suspects? All of them, he growled. And the steel box is missing. I noticed. You also noticed, he continued, that Hale transferred a substantial sum out of his primary account yesterday. That was new. To whom? I asked. Unknown trust. I glanced at Wolfe. Send details, I told Kramer. And don't arrest anyone until we've had breakfast. Kramer hung up without comment. I relayed the information. Wolfe's eyes gleamed faintly. He transferred funds before the auction. Yesterday. Then he anticipated either victory, or death. That's comforting, I said. Wolfe rose. Now, when Nero Wolfe rises at 3 in the morning, it means his mind has found a thread worth pulling. He crossed to the desk and opened a drawer, removing the black invitation card. Archie, he said, compare this to Hale's. I retrieved Hale's card from my pocket. We laid them side by side. Identical embossing. Same ink. But Hale's bore that faint chalky smudge near the lower edge. Wolfe leaned closer. Construction dust, he murmured. From where? The Armitage house has been unoccupied for months, Wolfe said. Yet its renovation permits were recently filed. Renovation? Yes. Then why host an auction in a construction site? Wolfe looked at me as if I'd asked why men lie. To disguise activity. I nodded slowly. He returned to his chair. Archie, the auction was not for sale of information. It was a device. To what end? To measure fear. I sat opposite him. You think someone wanted to see who would bid highest? Yes. And Hale? He disrupted the experiment, Wolfe said. By bidding unexpectedly. I considered that. He was never supposed to win. No, Wolfe agreed. He was not. The orchids upstairs exhaled their faint, expensive perfume. Outside, somewhere in the city, a truck rattled past, carrying something ordinary and honest. Inside the brownstone, we had murder and motives layered like varnish. What about the box? I asked. If it contained authentic documents, Wolfe said, it would have been guarded more carefully. You think it was empty? I think, Wolfe said slowly, that its value lay in perception. The phone rang again. This time, it wasn't Kramer. It was a man identifying himself as Horace Vance. I demand a meeting, he said sharply. Immediately. Wolfe took the receiver from me. You will demand nothing, he said evenly. You will request an appointment at my convenience. There was silence on the line. Then Vance swallowed pride. Very well. Wolfe named an hour. After he hung up, he looked at me. They are afraid, he said. Of exposure? Of one another. And of us? Wolfe permitted himself the faintest smile. They should be. I leaned back. Lucien Hale was dead. A steel box had vanished. Millions had been offered for secrets nobody had seen. And somewhere in that foggy mansion, someone had administered poison with the confidence of a man who knew exactly what would happen next. Wolfe closed his eyes again. Archie. Yes. The auction was not interrupted by Hale's death. No. It was completed. I frowned. How? Wolfe's voice was calm. The highest bidder, he said, was fear. And someone had just paid the price of silence. Chapter 4, The Devil Makes a Counteroffer. If there's one thing I've learned about murder, it's that it doesn't like being ignored. By mid-morning the brownstone smelled of orchids and coffee, which is Wolfe's preferred atmosphere for intellectual combat. He had already spent 2 hours upstairs in the plant rooms, tending to his botanical aristocracy, and another hour at breakfast correcting the universe through silence. I was at my desk reviewing Inspector Kramer's preliminary notes when the mail arrived. Fritz carried the envelope in on a tray again. Black. I looked at Wolfe. He looked at the envelope. We both knew before it was opened. Archie, Wolfe said, do not dramatize. I never dramatize, I replied, slicing it open. The card inside was identical in stock and design to the previous invitation. Same embossed lettering. Same red ink. But this time the message was shorter. Mr. Wolfe. You were not present. You should have been. The auction continues. Midnight. Bid properly. Below that, in smaller print. The documents concern wartime treason. No address this time. Just audacity. I handed it to Wolfe. He read it without blinking, then placed it face down on the desk as though it were mildly distasteful. Insufferable, he said. Flattering, I countered. We've been invited to round 2. Wolfe leaned back in his red leather armchair. There will be no round 2. They're dangling wartime treason, I said. That's not small potatoes. It is bait, Wolfe replied calmly. For whom? For anyone with a past. I considered that. You think the steel box contained proof? I think, Wolfe said, that the word treason was chosen for effect. The phone rang. I picked up. Wolfe residence. A cultured voice answered. This is Mrs. Adriana Devereux. I require Mr. Wolfe's counsel. I covered the receiver and raised a brow. Wolfe extended his hand. I passed it to him. Madam, he said smoothly, you are calling because you fear association. A pause. Then, Mr. Wolfe, I do not fear. I manage. I am not persuaded, Wolfe replied. If you wish to discuss your management, you may come at 4. He hung up before she could object. You're charming, I said. Efficiency is charming, Wolfe replied. Before I could retort, the doorbell rang. Fritz answered and returned with a card. Senator Caldwell, he announced. Wolfe sighed as though democracy itself had come calling. Show him in. The senator entered with the posture of a man accustomed to applause and currently receiving none. His tie pin gleamed, his face did not. "Mr. Wolfe," he said stiffly. "This situation must be contained." "Sit," Wolfe said. Caldwell remained standing for a beat, then obeyed. "The police are investigating," he continued. "I do not intend for my name to be dragged through scandal." "Then you should not attend clandestine auctions," Wolfe replied mildly. Caldwell flushed. "You don't understand," he said. "If what that box supposedly contains becomes public." "You assume it contains something," Wolfe interrupted. Caldwell hesitated. "That is what was implied." "Implied," Wolfe repeated. "By whom?" Caldwell's jaw tightened. "The auctioneer." "And you believed him?" "I believed," Caldwell said, voice lowering, "that someone wanted us to believe him." There it was. Wolfe steepled his fingers. "Why were you invited, Senator?" Silence. "I have served my country," Caldwell said carefully. "Certain decisions made during wartime were complex. Profitable. I offered." He shot me a glare. "Necessary," he said. Wolfe did not blink. "And Mr. Hale?" Caldwell's eyes flickered. "He facilitated introductions," he admitted. "Discreet introductions." "Between whom?" Wolfe asked. "That is confidential." Wolfe rang the bell. Caldwell stiffened. "What are you doing?" "Ending this interview." Caldwell swallowed. "Shipping contracts," he said quickly. "Private carriers during restricted supply periods." "Mr. Vance?" Wolfe asked. Caldwell looked away. "Perhaps." "Interesting." When Caldwell left, I said, "They're circling." "They are frightened," Wolfe replied. The afternoon brought Horace Vance. He did not bother with pleasantries. "This must be stopped," he said flatly. "If those documents exist." "You assume they do," Wolfe said again. Vance leaned forward. "Hale told me they did." "Before or after he bid $1.6 million? I asked. Vance's eyes narrowed. "You're implying something." "I'm observing," I said. Wolfe's voice remained serene. "Mr. Vance, did you fund the event?" Vance's expression froze for a fraction too long. "No." "That was not a denial," Wolfe said. Vance stood abruptly. "I will not be interrogated in my own city." "You are not," Wolfe replied. "You are being evaluated." Vance left with less composure than he'd entered. When the house quieted again, I looked at Wolfe. "You think he financed the auction?" "I think," Wolfe said, "that the event required resources. Discretion. Access to a vacant property under renovation. Construction dust," I said. "Yes." "And the auctioneer?" "Disposable," Wolfe replied. The telephone rang again. This time it was Inspector Kramer. "They found the auctioneer," Kramer growled. "Dead in his apartment." "How?" I asked. "Blunt force trauma. Clean job." I glanced at Wolfe. "Time of death?" Wolfe asked into the receiver. "Late last night. After the auction." "Right." Wolfe thanked him and hung up. I whistled softly. The devil cleans house. Or someone ensures silence, Wolfe said. The room seemed to shrink slightly. "So," I said, "Hale is dead. The auctioneer is dead. The steel box is gone. And someone wants you to attend round 2. Wolfe nodded once. "Which you won't." "Correct." I paced. "They're escalating." "They are adapting," Wolfe corrected. "And the wartime treason angle?" "An amplification," Wolfe said. "Designed to increase panic. Among the same group." "Likely." I stopped pacing. "You're not going to the mansion?" "No." "Then what?" Wolfe's eyes gleamed faintly. We shall reverse the venue. I smiled slowly. You're inviting them here? Yes. To the brownstone? Yes. Where you control the room? Always, Wolfe said calmly. And if the killer attends? Wolfe lifted his beer. He must. The late afternoon light filtered through the tall windows, turning the room gold. Outside, taxis honked, life continued. Inside, the scent of orchids floated down from upstairs, faint and expensive. Archie, Wolfe said. Yes. Arrange for Mrs. Devereux, Senator Caldwell, Mr. Vance, and Mr. Kessler to attend tomorrow evening. And if they refuse? They will not. Why not? Because, Wolfe said softly, the auction continues. I grinned. And this time, I said, we're holding the gavel. Wolfe did not smile. But his eyes did. Somewhere in Manhattan, a steel box without contents was causing panic among powerful people. Somewhere, a killer believed he had silenced the wrong man at the right moment. And tomorrow night, in the quiet glow of a brownstone office scented with orchids and lit by a brass lamp, the devil would make a counteroffer. We intended to listen. Chapter 5, Smoke in the Orchid Room. If you want to see powerful people perspire without heat, invite them into Nero Wolfe's office and let him close the door. By 7:30 the brownstone had been polished into respectability. The lamps glowed warm against the early evening dark, the city outside murmured with traffic and impatience. Upstairs, the orchids had been tended and misted, and their faint, cultivated perfume drifted down the staircase like an expensive warning. Wolfe was in his red leather armchair, immovable, expansive, wearing a dark suit that made him look less like a detective and more like a judicial monument. The brass desk lamp cast gold across his face and left the corners of the room in shadow. I stood near the door, because that's my territory, thresholds and exits. The doorbell chimed. First came Senator Caldwell, precise and rigid. Then Horace Vance, jaw clenched as if biting down on his own temper. Mrs. Adriana Devereux arrived wrapped in composure, pearls steady as her gaze. Victor Kessler entered last, quiet, hands folded lightly behind his back, eyes missing nothing. 4 guests. 4 motives. 1 dead man. Fritz withdrew after offering refreshments. No one accepted. Fear is a poor appetite stimulant. Wolfe allowed silence to stretch. He's very good at silence. It's one of his more profitable habits. Finally he spoke. Thank you for attending. Your cooperation is not optional. Vance stiffened. We are not under arrest. No, Wolfe agreed. You are under scrutiny. Caldwell cleared his throat. Mr. Wolfe, this entire matter has grown disproportionate. A man is dead, Wolfe replied evenly. Disproportion is inevitable. Mrs. Devereux folded her hands. Surely we can agree the tragedy was unforeseen. Unforeseen? I said. You were bidding on treason. Her eyes flicked to me, cool. On information. Wolfe raised one hand slightly. I shut up. Sometimes. The steel box, Wolfe began, was removed during a moment of chaos. Kessler spoke for the first time. As chaos is designed to permit. That earned him a look. You imply design? Wolfe asked. I imply opportunity, Kessler replied calmly. Vance turned on him. You were closest to the pedestal. And you, Kessler said softly, were closest to Mr. Hale. The room tightened. I watched hands. Caldwell's fingers tapped his knee once, then stilled. Vance's fists remained clenched. Mrs. Devereux's hands were steady. Kessler's were relaxed, too relaxed. Wolfe's voice cut through. Mr. Hale bid unexpectedly. Caldwell bristled. He was desperate. For what? Wolfe asked. Silence. I stepped in. He transferred a large sum from his account the day before the auction. That landed. Vance blinked. Mrs. Devereux's posture did not change, but her eyes sharpened. "You know this how?" she asked. "I have friends," I said pleasantly. Wolfe continued. Mr. Hale anticipated expenditure. Or consequence. He was unstable, Caldwell muttered. "Unstable men do not arrange trusts before midnight engagements," Wolfe replied. That shut him up. Wolfe leaned back slightly. "The poison was administered before the bidding began," he said. "Thus, Mr. Hale was marked prior to his attempt to outbid you." Vance snapped, "Are you suggesting the killer knew he would bid?" "No," Wolfe said. "I suggest the killer knew he would attend." Mrs. Devereux's gaze lowered momentarily. "And that attendance alone was sufficient cause," Wolfe added. The telephone rang. I picked it up. Inspector Kramer's voice came through. "They found the steel box," he said. I straightened. "Where?" "Construction dumpster behind the Armitage house." "Contents?" "Empty." I glanced at Wolfe. He held out his hand. I passed him the receiver. "Yes, Inspector," he said. "Describe its condition." Pause. "Untouched. No forced entry." Another pause. "Thank you." He hung up. "Empty," I said aloud. "Yes," Wolfe confirmed. Vance let out a breath. Caldwell's shoulders eased a fraction. Mrs. Devereux's lips curved faintly. Kessler's expression did not change. Wolfe observed them all. "The box contained nothing," he said. "That is absurd," Caldwell protested. "We were told." "You were told many things," Wolfe interrupted. "You chose which to believe." Mrs. Devereux spoke softly. "If the box was empty, then the auction was a farce." "Not entirely," Wolfe said. "It produced measurable results." "Results?" Vance demanded. "Reactions," Wolfe corrected. "The orchid scent seemed stronger just then." "You mean to say," Kessler murmured, "that we were being observed?" "Yes," Wolfe said simply. "And by whom?" Caldwell asked sharply. Wolfe did not answer. Instead, he turned to Mrs. Devereux. "You have extensive philanthropic ventures," he said. "Including Veterans Relief?" "Yes." "Funded partly through anonymous donations?" She smiled faintly. "Privacy is fashionable." "And war contracts," Wolfe continued, "often require logistical intermediaries." Vance stiffened again. Mrs. Devereux's eyes met Wolfe's steadily. "You are assembling a narrative," she said. "I am assembling fact," Wolfe replied. Vance stood abruptly. "This is harassment." "Sit," Wolfe said. He did. Caldwell leaned forward. "If the box was empty, then there were no documents." Wolfe's gaze was steady. "Were there?" he asked. Caldwell hesitated. That was answer enough. Mrs. Devereux shifted slightly in her chair. Kessler finally spoke again. "Mr. Wolfe," he said calmly, "if the box was empty, then Mr. Hale died for nothing." "No," Wolfe said quietly. "He died for something." "For what?" Vance snapped. "For silence." The word lingered. Outside, a taxi horn blared faintly. Inside, the room felt smaller. I broke the quiet. "The auctioneer is dead too." That jolted them. "What?" Caldwell exclaimed. "Blunt force trauma," I said. "Late last night." Mrs. Devereux's composure cracked for the first time, a flicker, quick and gone. Kessler's eyes narrowed. Vance swore under his breath. Wolfe spoke gently. "The event required coordination. Venue. Invitations. Security. Someone financed it. No one spoke. Someone," Wolfe continued, "ensured the removal of the steel box." Still silence. "Someone," he added, "ensured the auctioneer would not speak." Caldwell's voice was tight. "You have no proof." "Not yet," Wolfe agreed. Mrs. Devereux rose gracefully. If this is an accusation. It is an observation, Wolfe said. She regarded him for a long moment. Then she said, you believe one of us orchestrated this? I believe, Wolfe said calmly, that the auction was not about acquiring secrets. It was about identifying vulnerability. Whose? Vance demanded. Wolfe did not answer. Instead, he turned to me. Archie. Yes. Escort our guests out. That surprised them. You're dismissing us? Caldwell asked. For now, Wolfe said. One by one, they left. Vance last, jaw rigid. When the door closed and their footsteps faded, I exhaled. Well, I said. That was cozy. Wolfe remained seated, eyes half closed. Observe, he murmured. I did. And? Kessler is too calm, I said. Vance too volatile. Caldwell too defensive. Devereux too controlled. Wolfe nodded faintly. And the empty box? I asked. Exactly, he said. Exactly what? Wolfe opened his eyes fully. Archie, when men bid millions for unseen documents, they are not purchasing information. They're purchasing reassurance. Yes. That it doesn't exist. Precisely. I sat down slowly. So Hale's bid was disruptive, Wolfe said. It threatened to expose more than the documents. And the killer? I asked. Wolfe's voice was calm, almost thoughtful. The killer, he said, was not buying silence. Then what? He was preserving control. The orchids upstairs released another faint breath of perfume. Outside, New York continued in ignorance. Inside the brownstone, smoke from Wolfe's cigar curled upward into lamplight, and the air felt heavy with calculation. Somewhere among our four polished suspects sat the architect of an auction that sold nothing, and revealed everything. We just hadn't yet identified the highest bidder. Chapter 6, The Man Who Bought Nothing. If there's one thing Nero Wolfe hates more than wasted time, it's wasted thought. And by Thursday afternoon he had decided someone in our little quartet had spent both lavishly. The morning began, as all respectable revolutions should, with orchids. Wolfe had been upstairs from 9 to 11, tending to his botanical royalty while I paced below with impatience and coffee. The house carried that faint, cultivated fragrance, green, precise, expensive. It always amazes me how serene murder investigations feel in that environment. As if the plants refuse to acknowledge human stupidity. At 11:30 Wolfe descended, settled into his red leather armchair, and demanded beer with the gravity of a man requiring oxygen. Archie, he said, once the glass was positioned correctly, Mr. Kessler. Already ahead of you, I said. He left the brownstone last night and went straight to the Pierre Hotel. No diversions. No panic. Ordered brandy. Slept. Wolfe grunted softly. He is too composed, I continued. And today he purchased a ticket. Destination? Southampton. Ship leaves tomorrow. Wolfe's eyes opened fully. That is interesting. Is it interesting like curious, or interesting like arrest him? Neither, Wolfe said calmly. Interesting like misdirection. I leaned back against the desk. You think he's bluffing? I think, Wolfe said, that men who flee do not purchase tickets openly. Fair. Still, I said, I'd like to have a chat. Then chat, Wolfe replied. And so I did. Kessler received me in his hotel suite as if I were a minor inconvenience sent by the concierge. He wore a light gray suit, impeccably pressed. His luggage sat neatly packed by the door. Too neatly. You are early, Mr. Goodwin, he said smoothly. I dislike farewells, I replied. They imply distance. He gestured for me to sit. I am not fleeing, he said before I asked. Good, I said. Because fleeing implies guilt. And you assume guilt. I assume motive, I corrected. He poured brandy without offering me any. Rude. I attended the auction out of curiosity, he said. Nothing more. Curiosity doesn't cost $1.5 million. It might, he replied, if one suspects one's name could appear in unpleasant company. There it was. You were afraid, I said. Of implication, he replied calmly. Not of truth. Meaning? He leaned back. I knew the box contained nothing. I stared at him. That's a bold claim. It is a correct one. How? Because, he said evenly, I helped arrange it. The room seemed to shift slightly. You financed it? I asked. No, he said. I suggested the structure. I let silence sit between us. You expected panic, I said. Yes. Why? To see who panicked. And you panicked too, I said. He smiled faintly. Only enough to blend. I studied him. You didn't intend to win. No. Then why bid? To escalate. So someone else would overreact. Precisely. And Hale? His expression changed, just a fraction. Hale was not part of the design, he said. He died anyway. Yes. And you didn't expect that? No. His voice held something there, regret, perhaps. Or calculation. You're leaving tomorrow, I said. Yes. Convenient. I do not enjoy remaining in environments where amateurs improvise murder. That was an interesting choice of words. Who's the amateur? I asked. Kessler's eyes met mine steadily. The one who administered poison before understanding the sequence. I stood. You're telling me the poison disrupted your plan? Yes. And your plan was? To measure fear, he said simply. Fear of what? Exposure. Exposure of what? That, he said softly, is the question. I left him there with his brandy and his composure and took a taxi back downtown. Wolfe listened without interruption as I recounted the conversation. When I finished, he said, he is telling the truth. You're sure? Yes. That's annoying. Yes. I paced. So the auction was his idea. But he didn't finance it. Likely not, Wolfe said. He lacks infrastructure. And he didn't poison Hale. No. You're very certain today. I am consistent, Wolfe corrected. I dropped into the chair opposite him. Hale was never meant to bid, I said slowly. Correct. The poison was administered before bidding. Yes. So whoever poisoned him expected him to attend, but not interfere. Yes. And the steel box? An instrument, Wolfe said. For provoking reaction. Yes. I frowned. But Hale bid anyway. Yes. Why? Wolfe lifted his beer and considered it before answering. Because he discovered something. What? He realized the box was empty. I stared. You're guessing. I am reasoning, Wolfe said mildly. Explain. Hale transferred funds the day before the auction. Why? To buy the box. Or, Wolfe said, to prevent someone else from doing so. Because he knew there was nothing inside? Yes. That doesn't make sense. It does, Wolfe replied. If the box was empty, then the true value lay in identifying who feared it. I leaned forward. So Hale realized the trap. Yes. And decided to force someone's hand. Precisely. And someone panicked first. Wolfe nodded once. Therefore, he said, the poison was administered not to silence Hale for past knowledge, but to prevent him from revealing present insight. I let that settle. So he wasn't killed for what he knew. No. For what he realized. Yes. That was worse. The phone rang. Inspector Kramer again. They found construction permits tied to a shell company, he said. Funds traced back to a foundation. Name? I asked. He hesitated. Devereux Charitable Trust. I looked at Wolfe. He did not move. Interesting, I murmured. Very, Wolfe agreed. After I hung up, he spoke. Mrs. Devereux had access to venue, funds, and discretion. And motive? To test loyalty. To whom? That, Wolfe said calmly, remains to be clarified. I rubbed my temples. Kessler suggested the killer was an amateur. Yes. But 2 men are dead. Yes. And the steel box was empty. Yes. So the entire spectacle was theater. Yes. And the real auction? Wolfe's eyes gleamed faintly. Was for information. Whose information? Yours, Archie. I blinked. Mine. Metaphorically, he said. Observation of reaction. I exhaled. So who bought nothing? Hale, Wolfe replied. He died. Yes. But he didn't purchase the illusion. Correct. And someone else couldn't afford that. Wolfe closed his eyes briefly. The man who bought nothing, he said softly, threatened the one who needed everything controlled. Outside, Manhattan traffic hummed. Inside, orchids scented the air like silent witnesses. We had a financier, a strategist, a senator with secrets, and a shipping magnate with contracts that preferred darkness. And somewhere in that web of money and fear sat the person who poisoned Lucien Hale, not for his past, but for his perception. I looked at Wolfe. What now? He opened his eyes. Now, he said calmly, we remove illusion. And how do we do that? Wolfe's voice was almost gentle. We invite them back. The devil's auction, it seemed, was far from concluded, and this time, someone would have to bid with truth. Chapter 7, The Illusion of Value. By Friday evening the brownstone felt less like a home and more like a chessboard. The pieces were polished. The air was scented with orchids. And Nero Wolfe had decided it was time to stop reacting and start conducting. He had not left the house all day. That's not unusual. Wolfe regards unnecessary travel the way other men regard minor surgery. Instead, he remained in his red leather armchair, immovable, massive, eyes half-lidded while his mind rearranged Manhattan. I stood by the window watching the city settle into dusk. Taxis slid through traffic. Neon flickered to life. Somewhere down the block, a diner sign buzzed like it had an opinion. Archie, Wolfe said without opening his eyes. Yes. You are restless. I'm homicidal, I corrected. 2 men dead. 1 steel box emptier than a politician's promise. And we're waiting. Yes, Wolfe said calmly. We are waiting for them to become uncomfortable. They already are. Not sufficiently. I turned from the window. Run it again, I said. Slow. Wolfe opened his eyes. The steel box, he began, contained blank papers. Confirmed by police. Yes. The auction was staged to identify who feared exposure most. Yes. Kessler proposed the structure. Yes. Devereux funded the venue through her foundation. Yes. Caldwell had political vulnerability. Yes. Vance had financial vulnerability. Yes. And Hale? Hale, Wolfe said quietly, recognized the illusion. I leaned against the desk. So he bid to force someone's reaction. Yes. And that someone poisoned him before he could leverage it. Precisely. But why kill the auctioneer? I asked. Wolfe's voice was patient. Because the auctioneer knew the design. And if police questioned him, he might reveal who commissioned it. I nodded slowly. So whoever financed it also silenced the facilitator. Yes. And the box was discarded. Yes. Because its purpose was fulfilled. Yes. I exhaled. And the purpose was? To measure guilt, Wolfe said softly. The phone rang. I picked it up. Victor Kessler. I have delayed my departure, he said evenly. I assume Mr. Wolfe has reached a conclusion. Assume nothing, I said. Come at 8. When I hung up, Wolfe said, good. You're not surprised. I anticipated impatience. At 8 precisely, the doorbell chimed. This time they came together. Caldwell first, pale but rigid. Vance behind him, jaw tight. Mrs. Devereux composed as ever. Kessler last, eyes cool and observant. They entered the office and arranged themselves almost instinctively in the same chairs as before. Wolfe did not greet them warmly. Gentlemen. Madam. Sit. They sat. Fritz withdrew after setting a tray of coffee no one touched. Wolfe's voice was calm, resonant. The steel box was empty. No reaction. You were bidding not on documents, but on fear. Caldwell shifted. Vance crossed his arms. Mrs. Devereux watched Wolfe steadily. Kessler's gaze flicked briefly to me. Wolfe continued. Mr. Kessler has admitted proposing the structure. All eyes turned to Kessler. He inclined his head slightly. Yes. You sought to identify vulnerability. Yes. And you succeeded. In part, Kessler said. Wolfe nodded. However, Mr. Hale's death was not part of your design. No, Kessler replied firmly. Wolfe turned to the others. Mr. Hale bid unexpectedly. He intended to expose the artifice. Caldwell snapped, how could he expose what did not exist? Wolfe's eyes sharpened. Because, he said quietly, he understood the purpose. Silence. Vance leaned forward. You're suggesting Hale realized the box was empty. Yes. And? Vance demanded. And he intended to identify who feared that emptiness most. Mrs. Devereux spoke softly. Fear of nothing is absurd. On the contrary, Wolfe replied. Fear of exposure is potent, even if the exposure is imagined. Caldwell's hand trembled slightly. Wolfe observed it. The poison, Wolfe continued, was administered before bidding began. Therefore the killer acted preemptively. Speculation, Vance muttered. No, Wolfe said evenly. Sequence. Kessler folded his hands. The question, he said calmly, is who recognized Hale's intention first. Wolfe nodded approvingly. Indeed. The room tightened. I stepped in. Hale transferred funds the day before the auction. He was preparing to bid high. Yes, Wolfe said. And someone knew this. Caldwell looked sharply at Vance. Vance glared back. Mrs. Devereux remained motionless. Kessler's eyes moved from one to the other like a chess player considering sacrifice. Wolfe leaned back slightly in his armchair. Gentlemen, he said, you were not competing for information. You were competing for reassurance. Reassurance of what? Caldwell demanded. That the others were more afraid than you, Wolfe replied. That landed. The scent of orchids drifted down faintly from upstairs, almost mocking. Vance spoke. If the box was empty, then there were no documents. Wolfe's gaze shifted to him. Were there not? Vance hesitated. Kessler's lips curved faintly. Mrs. Devereux finally moved, just a slight adjustment of posture. Caldwell wiped his brow. Wolfe's voice lowered slightly. The illusion of value, he said, is often more powerful than value itself. I watched their faces. Each calculating. Each measuring. So who benefited? I asked aloud. Wolfe did not answer immediately. Instead, he said, the auction was designed to flush out fear. Yes, Kessler agreed. And Hale's bid threatened to invert the dynamic. How? Caldwell snapped. By forcing the architect to reveal himself, Wolfe said. The silence that followed was thick. Mrs. Devereux spoke quietly. You are constructing a theory. I am dismantling one, Wolfe replied. Vance stood abruptly. I will not sit here and be accused. You are not yet accused, Wolfe said calmly. Vance sat again. I moved slightly closer to the door. The air felt charged. Mr. Hale, Wolfe continued, realized that the box's emptiness was its true weapon. And? Vance demanded. And he intended to use that weapon. Against whom? Caldwell asked. Wolfe's eyes passed over each of them slowly. That, he said softly, is what we shall determine. Outside, a siren wailed somewhere distant. Inside, the brownstone felt like the center of something inevitable. 2 men were dead. An auction had sold nothing. And 4 powerful individuals sat under lamplight, each wondering whether the next word spoken in that room would cost them everything. Wolfe folded his hands over his stomach. The illusion, he said quietly, has expired. I looked at him. And the truth? Wolfe's gaze sharpened. Tomorrow, he said. The devil's auction was ending. And someone in that room already knew they had bid too high. Chapter 8, The Devil Collects. There is a particular stillness that descends upon Nero Wolfe's office just before he ruins someone's life. It isn't dramatic. It isn't theatrical. It's orderly. The orchids upstairs have been tended. The brass lamp cast its civilized glow. Wolfe occupied his red leather armchair with the serene authority of a man who has already reached his verdict and is only waiting for the ritual of announcement. I stood by the desk, because that's where I prefer to watch detonations. They arrived at precisely 7. Senator Caldwell, pale but rigid. Horace Vance, carrying indignation like luggage. Victor Kessler, composed. Mrs. Adriana Devereux, immaculate, poised, dangerous. 4 bidders. 1 collector. Fritz withdrew silently after closing the door. Wolfe did not rise. Sit, he said. They did. No one requested refreshment. Wolfe folded his hands. Gentlemen. Madam. We will conclude. Caldwell cleared his throat. I trust you have something substantial. I do, Wolfe replied. Vance muttered, at last. Wolfe's gaze moved deliberately from face to face. The auction was an instrument, he began. A device to measure fear among a small circle of individuals connected by discrete wartime arrangements. Caldwell stiffened. Vance's jaw hardened. Mrs. Devereux did not move. Kessler watched Wolfe with open interest. Mr. Kessler, Wolfe continued, proposed the structure. A sealed box. Anonymous invitations. A controlled environment. Kessler inclined his head. Yes. You did not intend murder. No. You intended revelation. Yes. Wolfe nodded. Mrs. Devereux funded the venue through her foundation, concealed beneath renovation permits. Her eyes flickered, just once. My foundation funds many properties, she said smoothly. Indeed, Wolfe replied. Including the Armitage House. Silence. Senator Caldwell, Wolfe continued, and Mr. Vance both possessed incentive to discover whether documents existed linking wartime contracts to irregular profit. That is absurd, Caldwell snapped. Is it? Wolfe asked calmly. Vance leaned forward. If documents existed, they would have surfaced long ago. Unless, Wolfe said, their existence was uncertain. The word hung there. Which was the genius of the device, Wolfe added. You were bidding not on proof, but on possibility. No one spoke. Wolfe's voice lowered slightly. Mr. Hale realized this. I saw it then, the tightening in Mrs. Devereux's fingers. He understood, Wolfe continued, that the box was empty. That its value lay in reaction. And he intended to force that reaction. Vance frowned. How? By bidding aggressively, Wolfe said. By compelling the architect to reveal anxiety. Kessler nodded faintly. Yes, he said. That was the risk. Mr. Hale transferred funds the day prior, Wolfe continued. He anticipated forcing someone's hand. Caldwell's breathing grew shallow. And someone, Wolfe said evenly, administered poison before the bidding began. Silence. Wolfe's eyes settled finally on Mrs. Devereux. You, he said. The word landed like a dropped gavel. Vance inhaled sharply. Caldwell turned toward her. Kessler did not move. Mrs. Devereux's expression did not shatter. It refined. On what basis, she asked quietly. Control, Wolfe replied. Her lips curved faintly. Explain. You funded the venue, Wolfe said. You controlled access. You selected the intermediary. You required loyalty from all participants. The auction was your instrument, not to discover secrets, but to measure obedience. Preposterous, Caldwell whispered. Wolfe ignored him. When Mr. Hale began to suspect the illusion, Wolfe continued, he became unpredictable. He could identify who most feared exposure by observing escalation. Mrs. Devereux's eyes sharpened. And that threatened you, Wolfe said. Why me? She asked calmly. Because, Wolfe replied, you were not bidding for reassurance. The room seemed to shrink. You were bidding to test alignment, Wolfe continued. You wished to know whether Senator Caldwell and Mr. Vance would panic, whether they would overextend to preserve mutual silence. Caldwell paled. Vance swore softly. Mrs. Devereux's composure held, but thinner now. When Mr. Hale bid $1.6 million, Wolfe said, you understood he had recognized the structure. If he won, he could expose the emptiness publicly. The illusion would collapse. And, she asked softly. And your leverage would evaporate. Silence. You administered poison before bidding, Wolfe continued. You ensured his removal before he could invert the mechanism. That is fantasy, she replied. Is it? Wolfe asked. He gestured toward me. Archie. I stepped forward. Champagne trays were circulated before bidding began, I said. Mrs. Devereux personally greeted guests. Including Hale. All eyes shifted to her. You touched his glass, I added. That proves nothing, she said. No, Wolfe agreed. But your foundation paid the auctioneer. And after Mr. Hale's death, the auctioneer was silenced. She did not blink. Mr. Kessler proposed structure, Wolfe continued, but he lacked motive for murder. Mr. Vance lacked subtlety. Senator Caldwell lacked opportunity. And I? She asked. You, Wolfe said softly, possessed motive, access, composure, and the discipline to discard the steel box once its function was fulfilled. Vance stood abruptly. She funded it, he demanded. Mrs. Devereux turned toward him, eyes cold. You benefited, she said evenly. From what? Caldwell snapped. From knowing where each of you stood, Wolfe replied before she could answer. The orchids upstairs exhaled faint fragrance. Wolfe leaned forward slightly. You believed, he said to her, that fear binds more securely than loyalty. Silence. Mr. Hale disrupted that equation, Wolfe continued. He threatened to expose not past crimes, but present manipulation. Mrs. Devereux's hands were very still now. You overestimated control, Wolfe said. And you underestimate me, she replied softly. The doorbell rang. Perfect timing. I moved to answer. Inspector Kramer entered with two plainclothes officers. He took one look at the room and grunted. Which one? Wolfe did not hesitate. Mrs. Adriana Devereux. Kramer's gaze locked on her. You'll come with us. She rose slowly. No hysteria. No collapse. Just calculation. You have no proof, she said. Enough to begin, Kramer replied. As they escorted her toward the door, she paused. You think this ends anything? She asked quietly. Wolfe met her gaze steadily. It ends your auction, he said. The door closed. Silence settled. Caldwell sank into his chair. Vance stared at the carpet. Kessler exhaled softly. The illusion, he murmured, was more valuable than any document. Yes, Wolfe agreed. And she weaponized it. Yes. Kessler nodded once. Well played, he said quietly. Not by you, I said. He almost smiled. When they were gone and the brownstone returned to its natural stillness, I looked at Wolfe. You knew when? I asked. When she did not react to the empty box, Wolfe said. Relief was universal, except in her. And the auctioneer? Disposable, Wolfe replied. I walked to the window. New York moved below, taxis, headlights, neon. 2 men dead, I said. Yes. For nothing. Wolfe lifted his beer. Not nothing, he said calmly. For control. I turned back. And the devil? I asked. Wolfe's eyes were half closed again, satisfied. The devil, he said softly, never auctions secrets. He sipped his beer. He auctions fear. Upstairs, the orchid stood immaculate and indifferent. And in the quiet of the brownstone, the illusion of value had finally been sold, to the only bidder who believed she could afford it.